Most men never realize when they start losing attraction. They think it happens because they said the wrong thing, sent the wrong message, or made a small mistake. But in reality, attraction often starts fading long before any obvious mistake appears. It begins the moment a man becomes emotionally dependent on attention. This is one of the biggest truths that 99% of men fail to understand. At the beginning, everything feels normal. A woman gives attention, and he feels good. She replies quickly, and his confidence rises. She shows interest, and his mood improves. There is nothing wrong with enjoying attention. The problem begins when attention becomes a necessity instead of a bonus, because once a man starts needing attention to feel valuable, his behavior starts changing without him noticing. He becomes impatient, he becomes anxious, he becomes overly available. He starts overthinking simple situations. A delayed reply feels important. A short response feels personal. A small change in behavior creates unnecessary worry. And suddenly, his actions are no longer driven by confidence. They are driven by fear. Fear of losing attention. Fear of being replaced. Fear of not being enough. The strange thing about neediness is that it rarely needs words to reveal itself. People can feel it. They can sense it in your behavior. They can sense it in how quickly you abandon your priorities. They can sense it in how desperately you seek reassurance. They can sense it in how much your emotional state depends on their response. And this is where attraction begins to suffer, because attraction grows best in freedom, not in dependency. Think about it for a moment. When someone feels that your entire happiness depends on them, it creates pressure. Instead of enjoying your presence, they begin feeling responsible for your emotional state. And responsibility is very different from attraction. Most men believe that showing more interest will solve this problem. So they try harder, they send more messages, they give more attention, they seek more reassurance. But the harder they chase certainty, the more uncertainty they create, because confidence is attractive, density is exhausting. A man who constantly needs proof that he is valued communicates something unintentionally. He communicates that he does not fully value himself. Now compare that to a man who enjoys connection but does not depend on it. He appreciates attention, but he does not require it. He enjoys companionship, but he does not lose himself inside it. His life continues moving forward regardless of what happens. His goals remain important. His standards remain intact. His confidence remains stable. This creates a completely different energy because his actions come from choice rather than need. And people naturally respond differently to that. The irony is that the less a man needs validation, the more authentic he becomes. He stops performing. He stops trying to force outcomes. He stops constantly calculating how to keep someone's attention. Instead, he simply becomes himself. And authenticity is far more powerful than desperation. This is why neediness is one of the fastest ways to destroy attraction. It quietly transforms confidence into dependence, strength into insecurity, and curiosity into pressure. The moment a man stops needing attention to feel valuable, he regains something far more important than attraction. He regains control over himself. And once that control is established, he becomes capable of developing the quality that truly separates exceptional men from average ones. A powerful sense of purpose that gives his life meaning beyond anyone's approval. One of the biggest lies most men believe is that attraction is created by words. They think the right message, the right compliment, or the right conversation will make someone deeply interested in them. As a result, they spend years trying to perfect what they say while completely ignoring what truly shapes how people perceive them. What they fail to understand is that purpose is often more attractive than charm, because charm can capture attention. But purpose commands respect. Think about the difference between a man who is constantly trying to impress people and a man who is deeply focused on building something meaningful. The first man spends most of his energy watching other people's reactions. He wants approval. He wants recognition. He wants confirmation that he is doing everything right. The second man is different. His attention is directed toward a mission. He has goals that challenge him. He has ambitions that demand discipline. He has responsibilities that require focus. And because of that, he carries himself differently. There is a certain confidence that comes from knowing where you are going. Not because life is perfect, not because every goal has been achieved, but because direction creates certainty. Many men underestimate how powerful this is. When a man lacks purpose, he often fills the empty space with distractions. He becomes obsessed with attention. He becomes obsessed with approval. He becomes obsessed with trying to be liked. His emotional state becomes dependent on external circumstances, but purpose changes that. Purpose gives a man something larger than validation. It gives him a reason to keep moving even when nobody is watching, even when nobody is praising him, even when nobody is choosing him. And that mindset creates strength. Human nature naturally notices people who are committed to something meaningful. There is something compelling about a person who wakes up every day with direction, someone who is building skills, someone who is chasing growth, someone who is becoming better because they genuinely want to improve their life. That kind of focus is difficult to fake, and because it is genuine, it becomes attractive. The irony is that many men believe attraction comes from making another person the center of their world. But in reality, people are often drawn toward those who already have a world of their own, a mission, a vision, a purpose, something that gives their life depth. This does not mean ignoring relationships. It does not mean becoming emotionally distant. It means refusing to make another person's approval the foundation of your identity. Because when a man has purpose, he becomes less reactive. He becomes more disciplined. He becomes more patient. He becomes more confident. Not because he is trying to appear strong, but because his life has direction. And direction creates stability. Without purpose, people drift wherever emotions take them. With purpose, they move forward regardless of temporary emotions. That is why purpose is more powerful than charm. Charm can create a moment. Purpose creates a character. Charm can attract attention. Purpose builds respect, and respect often lasts far longer than attention. The strongest men are rarely the ones trying hardest to be noticed. They are usually the ones investing their energy into becoming someone they can be proud of. Because when a man develops purpose, he no longer needs to convince others of his value. His actions begin speaking for him. And once a man becomes deeply committed to his mission, another fascinating psychological principle begins to appear. People start valuing his attention more because it is no longer available to everyone at all times. As a man becomes driven by purpose, something interesting begins to happen. His attention becomes more valuable, not because he is trying to create value, but because he is no longer giving it away endlessly. This leads to a psychological principle that most men completely misunderstand. Human beings often value what is limited more than what is constantly available, not because people are selfish, not because people enjoy losing things, but because scarcity naturally increases awareness. Think about anything that is always available. You rarely think about it. You rarely appreciate it. You assume it will always be there. And the moment something becomes guaranteed, the mind stops paying close attention to its value. The same principle often applies to human attention. Most men believe they must always be available to remain important. They think replying instantly, always saying yes, and constantly making themselves accessible will increase attraction. But very often, the opposite happens. The more available they become, the more predictable they become. And the more predictable they become, the less curiosity they create. Curiosity is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. People naturally think about what they cannot fully predict. They notice changes, they notice absence. They notice things that break familiar patterns. This does not mean playing games. It means understanding reality. Imagine a man whose entire life revolves around gaining someone's attention. He is always available, always waiting, always ready to drop everything. Over time, his attention becomes expected, and when something becomes expected, people stop seeing it as special. Now imagine a man who has goals, responsibilities, and a meaningful life. He is not constantly available because his life contains other priorities. He values his time. He values his focus. He values his mission. As a result, his attention becomes intentional rather than unlimited. That changes perception completely because intentional attention feels valuable. Unlimited attention often feels ordinary. This is why many men accidentally reduce their own value. They believe giving more and more attention will increase appreciation. Instead, they often remove the very thing that creates appreciation in the first place, the opportunity to recognize value. Human nature needs contrast. People appreciate light because darkness exists. They appreciate success because failure exists. They appreciate presence because absence exists. Without contrast, awareness fades. The irony is that the men who are most obsessed with getting attention usually lose it, while the men who are focused on building meaningful lives often attract attention without actively seeking it. Why? Because people notice individuals who appear to have direction. People notice individuals whose lives do not revolve around approval. People notice individuals who are comfortable investing energy into their own growth. And when someone is genuinely focused on growth, they naturally become less available, not intentionally, not strategically, naturally. This creates mystery. It creates curiosity. It creates questions. And questions keep people interested far longer than predictability ever can. Most men spend years trying to increase their value through words, appearance, or constant effort. But one of the most powerful psychological principles is much simpler. Value often increases when something is not endlessly available. And the moment a man understands this, he begins treating his attention as something worth protecting rather than something he gives away freely. Because once a man learns the value of his own time and energy, he becomes capable of developing an even rarer quality. Strong boundaries that command respect before attraction ever has a chance to grow. Once a man understands the value of his time, attention, and energy, he reaches a point where he must make an important decision. Will he continue allowing other people to define his limits, or will he begin defining those limits for himself? This is where boundaries become important. And yet, boundaries are one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern relationships. Most men hear the word boundary and imagine distance, coldness, or confrontation. They assume that setting standards will push people away. As a result, they avoid saying no. They avoid expressing their expectations. They avoid protecting their time and emotional energy. They believe being endlessly accommodating will make them more likable. But what often happens is the exact opposite. When a person has no boundaries, they unintentionally communicate that their standards are flexible, their time is flexible, their values are flexible, everything becomes negotiable. And human nature notices this. People may appreciate kindness, but they rarely respect someone who constantly abandons their own needs to satisfy everyone else. Think about how many men tolerate behavior that makes them uncomfortable simply because they fear losing someone's approval. They remain silent when they should speak. They ignore their instincts when they should trust them. They accept treatment they know is unhealthy because they are afraid that enforcing a standard might cause conflict. The problem is that every time this happens, they send themselves a message. They tell themselves that keeping someone else's attention is more important than protecting their own self-respect. Over time, that mindset becomes destructive because self-respect cannot grow where boundaries do not exist. Strong boundaries are not about controlling other people. They are about controlling what you allow into your life. They are a reflection of self-worth. When a man has healthy boundaries, he does not feel the need to argue constantly. He does not need to threaten. He does not need to force anyone to behave a certain way. He simply understands what aligns with his values and what does not. And when something consistently violates those values, he is willing to step back. That willingness creates strength because boundaries only matter when they are enforced. Anyone can talk about standards. Very few people are willing to uphold them when doing so becomes uncomfortable. This is why boundaries often reveal character. They show whether a person truly respects themselves or merely talks about self-respect. Human beings naturally test limits, not always intentionally. Sometimes people simply observe what behavior will be accepted, what behavior will be tolerated, what behavior will have consequences. When a man has no boundaries, he teaches people that almost anything will be tolerated. When a man has strong boundaries, he teaches people that respect is expected, and respect changes every interaction. The truth is that attraction without respect rarely lasts. But respect built upon self-respect creates a much stronger foundation. People are drawn toward individuals who know their value and protect it, not because those individuals are perfect, but because they demonstrate consistency. Their actions match their standards, their words match their behavior. That kind of integrity is powerful, because in a world where many people compromise themselves to avoid rejection, the person who remains loyal to their values stands out immediately. And once a man develops the courage to maintain boundaries without fear of losing approval, he discovers the final lesson that most people spend their entire lives avoiding: the realization that true power belongs to the person who is willing to walk away rather than abandon their self-respect. As a man develops stronger boundaries, he begins noticing something that most people never realize. Boundaries alone are not enough. Standards alone are not enough. Self-respect alone is not enough, because sooner or later, life presents a test, a situation where you must choose between holding on to your standards or holding on to someone's approval. And this is where most men fail, not because they are weak, but because they are afraid. Afraid of losing someone, afraid of being rejected, afraid of being alone, afraid that if they stand firm, the relationship, connection, or opportunity might disappear. So they compromise. At first, it seems harmless. They ignore behavior that bothers them. They excuse actions they know are wrong. They accept treatment they would never advise a friend to accept, all because they fear what might happen if they walk away. The problem is that every compromise comes with a hidden cost. The cost is self-respect, and self-respect is difficult to rebuild once it has been repeatedly sacrificed. Think about how many people stay in situations that drain them simply because they fear starting over. They tolerate disrespect because they fear loneliness. They tolerate inconsistencies because they fear losing attention. They tolerate unhealthy dynamics because they fear uncertainty. But there is something important they fail to understand. The fear of losing someone is often more destructive than actually losing them, because fear changes behavior. Fear makes people needy. Fear makes people desperate. Fear makes people abandon their values. And once fear takes control, they stop acting like the person they truly are. Instead, they begin acting like someone who is trying to avoid loss at any cost. That is why one of the most attractive qualities a man can develop is the willingness to lose what is not right for him, not as the difference. Not wanting to lose someone is normal. Being willing to lose someone, if it means protecting your self-respect, is power. There is a huge difference between the two. One mindset comes from fear, the other comes from strength. Human nature respects people who are willing to stand by their principles even when there is a cost attached. Why? Because it demonstrates conviction. It demonstrates emotional independence. It demonstrates that their decisions are guided by values rather than by desperation. Most men believe attraction comes from convincing someone to stay, but often respect comes from knowing you will be fine even if they leave. That confidence cannot be faked. It comes from knowing that your identity is larger than any one person. It comes from knowing that your future does not depend on someone else's decision. It comes from knowing that your worth remains intact regardless of who chooses you and who does not. This mindset changes everything. Because once a man stops fearing loss, he stops chasing, he stops begging, he stops proving, he stops negotiating his value, and suddenly his presence feels different, calmer, stronger, more authentic, not because he is trying to appear powerful, but because he is no longer controlled by the fear that controls most people. The irony is that many men spend years trying to become more attractive while secretly living in fear of rejection. Yet the moment they become willing to lose what does not align with their standards, they gain something far more valuable than attraction. They gain freedom. And freedom creates a presence that cannot be manufactured because it comes from a man who finally understands that his self-respect is worth more than anyone's temporary approval. And once that freedom is achieved, The final lesson becomes clear. The men who command the greatest respect are not the ones who chase attention, but the ones who are completely comfortable walking their own path, with or without it. Everything we have discussed leads to one final truth, a truth that most men spend years avoiding because it forces them to confront their greatest fear, the fear of losing someone. For most people, this fear controls their decisions more than they realize. It influences what they say, it influences what they tolerate, it influences how they behave. They may not admit it, but deep down, many of their actions are driven by a desire to prevent loss. They stay silent when they should speak. They accept less than they deserve. They chase when they should step back. They sacrifice their standards when they should protect them, all because they are afraid of one thing, being left behind. But here is the irony. The men who fear loss the most often lose themselves in the process. And losing yourself is far more dangerous than losing another person. Think about it. What happens when a man's happiness depends entirely on someone staying in his life? He becomes cautious. He becomes dependent. He begins making decisions based on fear rather than conviction. Every disagreement feels threatening. Every moment of distance feels alarming. Every sign of uncertainty feels like a crisis. Without realizing it, he slowly gives away his power, because power cannot exist where fear controls behavior. This is why the strongest presence in any room often belongs to the person who is comfortable walking away. Not because they want to leave, not because they enjoy losing people, but because they understand something most people never learn. They understand that self-respect must come before attachment. They understand that peace of mind must come before approval. They understand that a life built on fear can never create genuine confidence. A man who is willing to walk away carries himself differently. He does not beg for attention. He does not negotiate his worth. He does not spend every moment trying to convince others to choose him. Why? Because he has already chosen himself. And that changes everything. The moment a man truly values himself, he stops seeing rejection as proof of inadequacy. He stops seeing distance as proof of failure. He stops seeing another person's decision as the final verdict on his value. Instead, he understands that not every connection is meant to last. Not every person is meant to stay. Not every opportunity is meant to become permanent, and that is okay, because his identity is no longer attached to outcomes he cannot control. This creates a rare kind of freedom, the freedom to be authentic, the freedom to be honest, the freedom to maintain standards even when doing so carries a cost. Most people never experience this freedom because they spend their lives trying to avoid discomfort. But growth often begins where comfort ends. The willingness to walk away is not about arrogance. It is not about ego. It is not about proving a point. It is about knowing that your future does not depend on one person's approval. It is about trusting that your value remains intact regardless of who stays and who leaves. And that mindset creates a level of confidence that cannot be manufactured because it is rooted in reality. The reality that you can survive disappointment, you can survive rejection, you can survive loss. And once you truly understand that fear loses its grip on you, this is what 99% of men fail to understand. They spend years chasing attraction, attention, and validation, believing those things will make them powerful. But real power begins the moment a man stops chasing what he fears losing and starts building a life, a purpose, and a self-respect so strong that no one else's approval is required to make him feel complete. That is the quality most men ignore, and it is the quality that changes everything.